Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us this morning, where we'll be discussing building work streams, process flows, and defining critical roles. Before the presentation begins, I just want to run through a few basic housekeeping items. Following today's presentation, you will receive an email with a copy of the presentation as well as access to the recording, in case you have to step out or anything like that. Additionally, in the handout section of GoToWebinar, you can find some information about some of Connex's upcoming events, including our calendar of events and the agenda for our upcoming conference, Validation in GMP University, which will be taking place both live in Philadelphia as well as virtually. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can check out our website at connex.org. Additionally, as today's session is part of CAI's Operational Readiness webinar series, I just want to remind you to keep an eye out. We'll soon be announcing the next installment of that series, and I hope to see all of you there as well. Additionally, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to enter those in the questions section of GoToWebinar. If you don't think of anything now, but something comes up later, you can also email us at info@connex.org. And we'll be happy to follow up and get those questions answered for you and distribute those answers. Lastly, if there's any technical issues today, feel free to contact GoToWebinar at 888-646-0014. You can also try posting in the chat, and I'll do my best to assist. I am Jonathan Driscoll. I'm the marketing manager with Connex. Connex is a leading educational partner showcasing innovative processes and technology for the GMP and validation environments. I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about today's sponsor, CAI. CAI originated almost 25 years ago in 1996 with only 2 employees. But fast forward to today, and now CAI is an employee-owned company with more than 500 employees at locations all over the world. CAI strives to be a trusted partner to their clients through their offerings in a number of different areas. And if you'd like to learn more about CAI or inquire about their services, you can visit their website at www.cagents.com. Now, without further ado, to kick off today's presentation, I'd like to introduce both of our speakers. Joining us from CAI, we have Jeff Hall, the Associate Director for Human Performance, and Amy Bradford, a Quality Consultant with CAI. So at this point, I'd like to turn everything over to Jeff and Amy to get us started.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I thought I'd just kind of come on screen first so you can see yes, and soon we'll get the presentation up here. There's Jeff.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'll open the presentation up here in just a second. I've got it in the background. Let's see how this looks.
Here we go.
Sorry, Jonathan, I had the box here went behind the scenes on me. I'm good. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see
there
it.
We go.
Okay.
All right, so today we're going to talk about operational readiness and using work streams and process flows to get ready for that. Amy will start off the presentation and then we'll share some slides as we go forward. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So again, the topic today is operational readiness. So let's talk about operational readiness. So many of us, have become deeply engaged in projects or run mode. So on a site, we're engaged in either of these efforts, whether we be in a project mode or in a run mode in operations. Project mode can be, for instance, capital projects for a new facility, a new line, or some kind of improvement projects for enhanced capacity, for instance, adding a media tank or a buffer tank. But all of these are, timely, and they're cost heavy sometimes, but what the objective is really the output, right? Timely and cost-effective completion of the projects helps the organization achieve its goals. So, but when we're looking at a project, what is the actual objective of that project? And the objective is the output. How do we integrate what we've installed into the operation, or how do we bring the operation up? Statistically, what we find in a typical operation, that it's 1 to 2 years after licensure before we start to realize business case yields, production volumes, and really the costs of your business case. So we can see that there's a bridge really between the project mode and the operation, the run mode, or the operational readiness. So in this presentation, we're going to discuss how do we seamlessly move from that project mode into that run mode. You know, how do we bridge, build that bridge across that gap? So for project mode, let's take a little closer look to what we're talking about. Again, so in a project setting, we could be talking about, oh, I lost my screen, sorry. We could be talking about a new project or a new build. So construction, you know, to operations. So a green field or a brown field, and may not have any current operations going on as we're building or adding or revamping a facility. Or on another side of the coin, we could have a mature process that's ongoing, and now we're doing some kind of new addition. So we're running in both the production, the run mode. We're in both the run mode and the project mode. This can be some kind of equipment addition. Again, I'm going to add 2 buffer tanks and 2 media tanks to expand my capacity. Or I'm going to add a whole nother identical line to do, again, expand capacity. Or maybe it's just a product addition. But no matter what the circumstances, really the end goal remains the same. And that end goal is something we call vertical startup, or integration into operational readiness. So let's look at the end game and what the goal is. If we look at the graph on the right, we can see that it's kind of got 3 distinct areas: the blue bars, the vertical line, and then the horizontal line. So, you know, the blue bars represent things that we've identified, risks or tasks that need to be done in order to meet that vertical startup, in order to meet a design and startup time that's very efficient. So we're going to, you know, identify what we know as for the project, all of the requirements, and hopefully the result is that vertical startup. But now, after we've started up, we see where the vertical line meets the horizontal line, which is really the objective, right? Standard, sustained operations, hit the ground running, all the installations and qualifications are complete. We've handed off to operations, and right away, we are meeting all production requirements and market demand and the costs that we had anticipated or planned. So it's really critical, and that's kind of the operational readiness, where those 2 lines meet. How do we attain this graph? So again, this is the goal, but this is not always typically what really happens. I think for many of us that have been involved in projects, what we end up seeing is the orange line, right? We often find that we fall short of moving into that run mode, into that horizontal line, hitting the ground, being operationally ready right after we have done design and startup. Again, remember the statistic for a typical operation: 1 to 2 years after licensure to realize those business case yields that we've based everything upon, those production volumes, right? Those market demands, 1 to 2 years to meet that. That's maybe for a large project, but even for a smaller project of adding, again, 2 buffer tanks. How long before they are fully incorporated into the process that you can utilize that expanded capacity? Or have you maybe stolen a little bit from the operations side to support that project side. So you're behind in production due to shared resources and lost time. So this becomes our problem statement of how do we avoid that orange line? So if we look at the two next to each other, we see all the blue bars and the orange bars. What really are these? So we said in the beginning on the project side, these are risks or tasks for the project that we have identified up front. We've mitigated those, we've incorporated them for the project. But if we don't take into consideration what it takes to sustain and maintain operations, we may not have identified everything in those blue bars. And now when we go to begin operations, right, we have issues. So, and we can call this a number of things. We can call it extended startup. For instance, maybe you thought you're going to do 3 engineering runs, 3 PPQ runs, and come to find out there in your engineering runs, there's a gap you've missed. Things aren't working in unison the way that you had thought, and you have to add an extra engineering run, or you get to PPQ and the first run fails parameters, fails specifications. So now we need to go back. There's something we've missed, and that now becomes an issue. And so you're not quite running the way that you expected or planned. So as I said, not identifying these, right, extend that vertical startup. So what are these issues and risks? If we look at the design side, again, we're looking at a delay in meeting those qualification or validation times or extended startup, but it's due to the lack of definition really and incorporation of what we're going to call all work stream requirements to complete that PPQ or that startup. On the operations side, we may call it tech transfer gaps or equipment downtime and staff, repeated deviations or rework. Again, we haven't really incorporated everything into the project mode in order to meet the needs of the operation. For instance, I was on a project, it was a very large greenfield. The spine itself, that was all the clean utilities, was 1/4 mile long. At the very end of the spine was the QC laboratory. I come out of QC originally, so this was a big concern to me, and then to the site eventually. We were bringing up the Wi-Fi in phases as it went to points of use out in manufacturing. It was a very large plant, but when we go to do the first testing of the Wi-Fi system, we don't even have a lab in place or fully built or installed, because it's at the other end of it's at the very end of the spine. This ended up costing the project an extra $2 million in contracting an outside lab, people to come in and take samples. We didn't have the equipment, the space, the resources. So that's on the design startup side. On the operations side, it also had an impact. Once in operations, now we got to figure out how to transport samples from 1/4 mile away. So we have new people flows and kind of a process flow to go out and get samples. If we had incorporated things correctly, and again, what's important is the lack of definition and incorporation of all work streams on both sides. So if we look closely, if we'd incorporated everything, maybe we'd put the lab more in a central location in the middle of the building, where that it could be brought up earlier and was more convenient to the operation. So again, on both sides of these coins, next slide, Jeff, we see a lack of definition in incorporation of all the work streams, both in the project side, the project mode, and in the run mode. So let's look at a model of how do we avoid this, right? When we're talking about operational readiness, or where that vertical and that horizontal line meet, and how do we achieve that? we go back to a few simple things, right? We have to have direction set and alignment by our leadership. And each of these areas, we have to have production equipment, procedures, and people. So in this model, we're going to talk about how to identify those work streams, that everything is incorporated, how to identify who is critical, who do you need on the team, how to map those processes, and then once defined, how do we connect those interdependencies within and between those modes? So within the project mode or the operational mode, but more importantly, how do we integrate between the two? So how have we historically, though, looked at this picture? And it some ways does fit in with of where we're headed, right? Historically, we have different departments, but and we're going to talk about what is a work stream, but a work stream can be a department. But historically, we need all of these things, and this may not be all encompassing in this graphic, but in order to identify and control the risks, in order to attain site readiness or operational readiness. What we've historically done is, in a project mode, we've emphasized those first three, right? Manufacturing, science, and technology. They tell us the specifications for equipment and utilities. Facilities, equipment, and utilities. That's our installation, our engineering, our design. So projects are very heavy on those first three bubbles, and a lot of times forget the other bubbles, and to incorporate those, which ends up with those gaps that turn into those issues and we end up with that orange line of up and down and up and down. So let's kind of look at this another way. If we look at the two modes that we discussed, excuse me, and we start off at the big picture. The project mode very much, again, is concept, design, construction, commissioning, qualification, and then to a turnover, very engineering, design, construction, installation, and qualification heavy. But in the run mode, the premier thing that we are looking at, and really the only thing, is the operations itself. So, and those supporting work streams for the operation, for the manufacturing. We need all of these work streams to meet those operational goals, but they must be included in the project mode to build that bridge to a successful run mode or operations. So we've talked a lot about work streams. So what is a work stream? So Jeff is going to help us with that and describe how it applies to our model. So Jeff?
So what is a work stream? The term work stream can be pretty ambiguous, right? So it can be anything that's related to a project, a product, departments, disciplines. It can be used to describe process improvements, such as maybe a new piece of equipment that's installed. It's an area that basically includes all the activities that are associated with specific and discrete tasks. And it really needs to be completed and performed in order to achieve your collective goal. So it's defined by detailed examination of process flow in two different ways, right? So in the project world, it looks one way. In the run mode world, it looks another. So in order to have a work stream or establish a work stream, you need to make sure you have the critical roles filled out or filled for that work stream. So for each work stream, there's an owner. Typically, that's somebody who's more at the higher level end, a department head or a manager, or somebody who understands what needs to be in the work stream, but does not necessarily understand or have the complete knowledge of the individual tasks that are associated with the work stream. Then you need, for the task component, you need roles or subject matter experts who can actually help define those process steps and tasks within the work stream. Those subject matter experts could be your system owners, your engineers. A lot of times I see when we do a startup that we don't bring in, technicians until much later, but it might be a case where you have more of your senior technicians and managers and supervisors that are actually heading or being involved in those work streams. And of course, they all need to have the necessary project skills, right? So they need to be able to execute on the deliverables for the project.
So how are work streams applied to the model? So this is a first view of the model, and we can see on the vertical or y-axis here, we have a number of areas or expertise. Again, it can be an area, it can be a department, but we have a number of work streams. So this is the beginnings of the model really for the project side. We see design and construction, equipment and facility, and in each work stream, we have major milestones or sets of work, and really they become centers of excellence. And I'm going to use QC as an example. So in order to support the project, right, we need a method transfer plan, intermediate testing, raw material testing. We're going to need those methods rolled over. We're going to need to support EMPQ and environmental testing and clean utilities testing, and also the equipment cleaning program and cleaning validation. We're going to follow this example through what we call a center of excellence. So again, this is the beginnings of the model. We've identified our work streams on the y-axis. All of these, what we would maybe historically think of as departments, but talent and human performance, is maybe not really something we think of a department, but obviously a critical item for the project in project mode or in run mode to be successful. So we've started to identify our work streams. In each work stream, we have a major area or center of excellence that we need to develop further. And this is where really, as Jeff said, personnel and people. Remember, we have our 3 Ps, right? Production equipment, people, and procedures. This is where people also really become important. So let's look at what we're talking about for those folks in a center of excellence. So again, the center of excellence is really a specific category of work within that work stream. To be successful, we really need individuals or departments critical to the project success and that understand the activities and the discrete tasks that come from those activities in that center of excellence. This is where you're really subject matter experts from each of those work streams in those centers of excellence. It's really important that they are included. And again, they're going to be weaved back into, and what they define will be weaved back into the project mode, right? So that everything that's required to hit that run mode, to hit the ground running, to reach that operational readiness has been defined and incorporated. So now we have centers of excellence. How do we further define that even in just the project mode? Let's go, next slide. Yeah. So now I have my work streams identified and my center of excellence, which again, let's follow the example of cleaning validation. So now I've moved my centers of excellence for QC on the y-axis. So they now become my top line item. And now each of my SMEs in these centers of excellence is going to further detail out what's required. So if we look at cleaning validation as our example in the yellow diamonds, now my subject matter expert is going to say, well, in cleaning validation, I need a worst case product assessment. I need to develop CIP and COP cycles. I need to do equipment grouping. I need a cleaning agent selection, a MACO calculation, talks about clean hold time, dirty hold time, so these things. And this SME is going to, as they continually detail these items out, we can take those yellow diamonds and now put them on the y-axis and make, the detail for worst case products assessment, or for instance, equipment grouping. We can start to define the timeline and the tasks, and also start to understand the interdependencies, right? So for an equipment grouping, I need to interact with engineering and utilities and facilities to understand, or engineering, what are we buying? How many tanks? How are they alike? How am I going to group them? How are they piped together? What is the actual process? Where is my CIP skid? What are my routes? But those centers of excellence, we're going to dive down further into the detail, and we're going to repeat this exercise. I've given the example just for cleaning validation, but understand these line blocks are going to start to be filled in by each subject matter expert that is part of that work stream team and is the subject matter expert for that center of excellence. So we're going to repeat this exercise for each of those work streams and each of their centers of excellence. Once we've done that, we're going to go back and stack things and make a preliminary progression board, which Jeff is going to talk to us about.
So you can see where the centers of excellence have been established there. You can see where there are processes that are in place there. You can see where we've taken and mapped some areas in one work stream that will be tied to areas in other work streams. So the first step here in creating this progressive board is making sure that we list all of the work streams and the steps. So by detailing the center of excellence, we can now stack the top level and show some interdependencies that are critical to success. For example, the project lab at the end of the spine that Amy talked about earlier, that costs an additional $2 million to outsource because the building didn't go through this process of seeing where these things could be interdependent, and the reliability on the other areas was required. So doing this, you stack them, you create a timeline, and then you map the related steps. So in the case of cleaning, validation, and testing, you can see that that's associated with PQ. So equipment, facilities, and CQV are tied very closely to quality control in that particular step. So this will impact the operational readiness and the success if you don't go through this exercise. So for run mode, we start with a well-detailed and defined process flow. So this is run mode. So now we've gone from project mode to run mode, and now it looks a little bit different. As you can see, the work streams in the run mode actually are more related to department type titles. So these are your work streams here. You're using your departments, and then you're defining what each of those needs to do in the work stream, and you're applying it to a schedule. Begin with the handoff of the project mode, different perspective with additional requirements, have all the requirements that may be left out of the project plan. So there might be extra stuff here that you have to add. And then after the handoff, find out where there may be some rework or staff equipment downtime or supply issues that would result in repeating deviations. So that handoff from where you have the startup here. So prior to this was the project mode. Following that, you get into operations and run mode. The more work you do on the project mode side, the less risk and issues you will have on the startup side. So here's some examples of run mode work streams. We're using these to define the specific process flows. So when you're looking at manufacturing, quality control labs, operation support is a huge one. It's two simple words, but it's a large bucket, right? It's your engineering, it's your maintenance, it's your supply chain. It's all those things that are needed to support manufacturing. So you really need to understand what's going to be required as part of those. So you focus on the deliverables, procedures and policies, people, making sure you hire the right people at the right time within the actual process. And then by the time you get to run mode, making sure that you have qualified people in place. And then the equipment. So a huge effort in installing the equipment, getting it qualified, making sure it's going to do what it's supposed to do. These are all, as you can see at the bottom of the page, those are process steps that need to be mapped out. So this is an example of where we've used this before in a tool, an electronic whiteboard. We could map this out, show the process steps, and once we had the process steps, and we could go back and revisit each one. So each process step in a work stream has to have the detailed tasks that go along with it. And this is where your subject matter experts really play a key role. Need to make sure that you understand in manufacturing, you have, in this case, particular, you have different, potentially either different work streams or different processes. So media prep, upstream, downstream packaging, what's required for each one of those? As you can see on the right, we give an example of, it's a very simple example of fermentation. Certainly this is not everything that's included, but those are some of the tasks that would be associated with fermentation. How do you address those? How do you make sure you have all the information necessary to complete the fermentation process? Looking at quality control labs, looking at operation support, it's the same process for all of them. And when you tie it all together, you have the horizontal, those are your process steps, and you have the vertical lanes, which are your individual tasks. All of these come together into one big process map. And this is a key part to understanding what you need, because with this information, you can now move on to understanding what you need for the processes, what you need for the task. For those tasks, in the GMP world that we work in, you want to look at SOP and training requirements. How much time is involved for each of these? From a staffing and manning standpoint, what will you need from an operator's perspective or a technician's perspective? And then how do you tie it to a specific batch record? This is a really good tool to have because, as you can see, there's a gap here. How can we have a decon cycle without any type of SOP or training? We say we have operators, it's in the batch record, but we do have a gap here that we haven't addressed. So this is a really, really great tool to have. I have seen many times in my past where we have gotten into a startup, we're ready to move forward, and it's like, wow, who wrote that procedure? We didn't have one. Or we're going to run 24/7 we're going to run 24/7, and we have 2 maintenance guys to support that. Does that make sense? Probably not. So we're going to take all of this and we're going to integrate it into the operational readiness model. So we've identified the work streams. So if you look at the table, that's obviously the left-hand vertical boxes. We've identified the processes for each of those. We've identified the task. You don't see them on this one because that detail is filled out in the actual process flow. Now we need to integrate the people, procedures, and the process from the project mode and the schedule and build a schedule. So how long will it take to move the project to run mode to get that vertical startup that we were talking about earlier? So we built the table and the work streams and all the tools that went with it, identifying the people, the processes, and the equipment. We put it into a schedule, a detailed schedule that we can follow. And through that, we're able to, if we did this correctly, achieve a vertical startup and operational readiness. Amy, you have anything you want to add to this before I move on to the summary side?
No, yeah, so now we've incorporated everything from the run mode by detailing out the process in a process flow and all of those tasks. And then now taking that back to the project mode to say, again, what is it I'm missing in order to, after that vertical startup, to hit that ground running? to be operational ready, to have the right people, the right procedures in place. Because again, at times we find that it's that orange line because we haven't incorporated what it takes for operational success right after startup. So in this schedule will be integrated all of those items that and tasks we identified in looking at those process flows, mapping out those procedures and people. It may extend what we originally thought for the project, but it enables us to have that vertical startup right into that horizontal operational success, operational readiness.
And by mapping all this out, those blue columns that you see in that vertical startup graph, those are risk. Those are all managed up front. And I'm sure that most people understand that risk is associated with cost. The more risk you have, the more cost you add to the startup. Amy's example of the spine was a perfect one, where nobody really assessed the risk there of putting the lab where they put it. And then they cost themselves an additional $2 million. When if they had actually really stopped and detailed it out like they have here, they probably could have saved that money. Okay, so we just spent the last 35 minutes or so talking about how you build work streams and processes to get you to a point where you can support a vertical startup. Really key points: defining each of the work streams. Whether you're doing this for a greenfield, brownfield, process improvement, putting in a new piece of equipment, the steps are the same. Making sure you understand what is required, what work streams are required to support that project, that product, that operational mode that you're trying to get to. Making sure you have the right people. So the team leaders are extremely important at this point. They're usually fairly senior people where they're associated with your PMO a lot, but the team leaders for each of the work streams, so people who own that environment, making sure that you have the center of excellence experts, your subject matter experts selected for that team. And then any other team members that can contribute to it. And they have to have the right skill set. They have to have the skill set to understand what's required in the work stream and the task. They also have to have the project management skill set to understand that they are working on a timeline that's critical to get them to a specific date to start up a plan. Define the process steps within the work stream, making sure that you cover all of the steps that are required, identify any gaps, identify any risk, make sure they're documented, document them and address them. And then once you've done that, map out each of the tasks in the center of excellence and integrate it into a schedule and a project plan. Once you've done that, if this is all done efficiently and effectively, then you can achieve that vertical startup and achieve operational readiness. So that really concludes our presentation for today. We got done a little bit early because we kind of went through some of the slides pretty quick, but it is an extremely important process. It's really simple to follow. I've been through several startups where they don't do this. They throw a schedule together. They don't talk to each other. They don't have the right people involved. They don't really understand the interrelations between each of the work streams and each of the activities that need to occur. And that does cost time and money. I recently was on a project where we built a manufacturing facility. It was basically a greenfield startup. And we had an $80 million budget to start with, and we spent over $120 million when we were done because they didn't go through these steps.
Yeah, I think one of the major points to realize is that many of us are used to operating in that project mode, right? It's what gets all the attention at times on a site, even a site that's doing some kind of addition. But that project mode doesn't always incorporate what I like to call the maintainers, and the sustainers, right? So we're very focused on the installation, the design, and the cost and the schedule associated with the project. But again, the objective at the end of the day is to be in that operational success mode. So we've got to really dive down into the process flow to identify what is it that the maintainers and the sustainers of the operation when it's running, what are their requirements? What do they need? What people, policies, procedures, and when do they need them? And then if that is incorporated back into the project, you attain that vertical startup, that blue line instead of that up and down orange where, oh, I missed something in maintaining or sustaining the operation. So with that, do we have, I don't really see any questions in the chat.
Nope.
I do see a couple questions here in the questions section.
Okay.
So I can read those for you guys. The first
Sure.
question I'm seeing here is, what does turnover between qualification and manufacturing mean?
Well, I mean, I can answer that. You know, for different projects, where your line into operational readiness is may differ. Typically, turnover is that you've done the commissioning a lot of times. You know, some of the preliminary qualification, you're ready to where I kind of call the rubber hits the road, maybe engineering runs, where now sections that you have qualified separately and have a turnover package for, let's say, the vessels and fermentation, maybe chromatography skids, and then you know, other further viral segregation or filtration to finished packaging, aseptic filling. We've looked at all these separately. They each have their own package. Those packages are all put together into an overall turnover package to say, I'm at some line of demarcation where I'm ready for it to all to come together. And again, that is typically specific and defined for each project on its own. Is it at the end of PPQ and everything is handed over to operations or engineering runs? But a turnover package itself is all of that documentation that's been put together from construction and commissioning and ETOPS over that we say we're at a point where everything now comes together and we have to have an actual manufacturing process. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think you covered it very well. Was there another question?
Yes. The other question I see here, how often do you recommend your work stream leads meet to revisit the progress and adjustments? I've seen problems with too many meetings and also too few.
Yeah, I think we've all seen that. You know, obviously you're going to have a lot more activity in the front end of the project than you are in the end as you're establishing work stream leads, you know, and the cadence by which you're going to report back, and how those work stream leads are leading with or are meeting probably with their separate work stream and SMEs to define that center of excellence. So, you know, in the beginning, I think it's project dependent on how big the project is. But once you're in a pace that you've defined everything up front, I would suggest at least once a week to say, where are we at on that schedule? Is there something else that we've missed in one of the work streams? Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Weekly is probably a fair cadence. Obviously, you let your project schedule drive a lot of those meetings, because I too have seen what you just talked about. You have meeting upon meeting, and then you spend, just like a lot of us do these days with other work, you spend all of your workday in meetings and you don't get the work done afterwards. So I would put it into the project plan, part of the schedule, and let that drive when you have your meetings.
Great question. We have another one that came through. What software do you build progression boards in, and do you use a specific timeline or just sequential actions within the work stream or department?
So we've started here using a tool called Miro because it's obviously with the pandemic and the inability for people to get together, it turned out to be a really great tool for us to actually use to build things electronically. We don't own it, so I can't really go out to endorse it for you, but I can tell you that's a tool that we've used, and it's done really well.
Yeah, and Miro is very flexible and has a lot of different formats for that progression board. As far as the schedule, that schedule is going to that timeline. You know, any project, you start with a general timeline. You started project work is typically starts from the top down, right? That you start with a big picture of chunks of time or phases. So you have a generalized timeline, but now as you incorporate those discrete tasks into that project mode, tasks from the run mode, from operations and the supporting functions of operations, that starts to really detail out that schedule and timeline for the project, because the run mode side of looking at that process flow down to discrete tasks and people and time really feeds into that schedule to give you a well-defined schedule with those interdependencies to understand your predecessors and successors. And also will give you view to where, you know, what can I do concurrently? What has to be done consecutively? Where can I maybe pull time?
Great. I don't see any other questions coming in at this point. However, again, if you do think of anything, feel free to reach out directly or mail us at info@connex.org. And again, we'll follow up and make sure we get those answers for you. I just want to take this opportunity again to thank everyone for attending, and obviously to our speakers, Amy and Jeff, for a wonderful presentation. I appreciate all of you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. With that, we'll give everyone a few minutes back and have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone.